This video is sponsored by Alpha Draft, where you can play fantasy esports, including Counter-Strike Global Offensive, and as a result, including ESL One Cologne, the major. You can go there, make teams, see who you think will win the specific days of the group stage. I assume they'll have them for the playoffs as well. Alpha Draft also produce and sponsor a podcast I do with Richard Lewis called By the Numbers, and the newest episode of that was recorded few hours ago for me last night, so that should be on the YouTube, if not now, tonight probably. We discussed ESL One Cologne, we discussed all the recent news. Now then, ESL One Cologne, the next CSGO major, the sixth in total. The first CSGO major was DreamHack Winter 2013. Then we had 3 in 2014, and then we had the one this year already, which was ESL One Katowice in March. So sixth major. One of the great things about Counter-Strike Global Offensive, something I love about it as a game, as many problems as the game itself has mechanically and in terms of some strategic aspects and map pool problems, one thing that I love about it as a genre, this particular tactical FPS and the way CSGO works tactically, is that it's a game of stars. Now, in some other esport team games, notably League of Legends, one of the most popular, one of the most successful, one of the biggest esport titles in terms of a team game, it's not as much a game of stars. Like, stars are what spearhead your win, and it will take stars to help you beat better teams, etc. But with that said, you routinely in League of Legends find situations where a player might actually be significantly worse than his opposing player at the same position rather, but he will have more success and maybe even have better stats in the game and look like, because his team wins, he's the better player. But actually he isn't the better player and maybe didn't even overall play better. But because of the nature of that game, the game's one continuous entity that evolves throughout. If your team's really ahead, if your team has advantages, those advantages to a degree can be transferred to you, and as much as you might not need to do as much to get kills here or to assist over here or to take part in getting global gold. Now these things don't exist in CSGO. Yes, there's a money system, but it resets. Yes, there are situations where you might be in like 1v3s and 1v4s if teammates die. This is all the case. But what's beautiful about Counter-Strike is that if you really are a superstar player, you can sometimes dominate the game even if your team's playing like shit. We saw this when Kenny S was in God mode. We saw this when Shox used to be a monster at the end of 2013, early 2014. We saw this when Olofmeister, most recently, literally took Fnatic on his back and helped them beat NIP on train by dropping like 39 kills or some ludicrous amount that it took for them to win what was still a close 16-14. So superstars can have a huge impact. And part of the reason for that is because, like I described, differently from something like League of Legends, what's great about CSGO is that in theory, as long as your team has money, nothing about the score of the game can actually affect you individually. As in, you could be down 10 rounds, but as long as your team has enough to buy, and you have armor, and you have a good rifle, and you have maybe a couple of grenades or a flash, if you are the better player, the superior player, you can still win this round and win the situations that are presented to you. So for example, we know it's possible in Counter-Strike to 1v5, because if you get an ideal set of circumstances, you might turn you might turn the 5 kills into 1v1s, and you might be able to find superior positioning there. You might be able to take them on your own terms if the terrorists attacking your site. There are lots of situations where, as a result, we can see where the edge is for where the really great players can still get their kills. Beyond that, stars themselves still tend to lead the teams in general. It's still an aim-based game. As great as your tactics are, as teams like Titan have showed us, as teams like Mouse, as they've risen now, have shown us, you still need those stars to make the tactics work. You still need the Shroud and Skadoodle if you're Cloud9 to execute those tactics, to shut down other teams when you're reading their tactics. You need Kenny S and Apex to open the sites up, to get the terrorist side rolling if you're the old Titan. You need Nex to allow the greatness of God B's reading and game leading to be fluid, to be flourishing within the server, to have a vitality beyond just a cool read that didn't work out because the players couldn't get killed or outskilled. Now with that said, as this sixth major, as the major that starts today, ESL One Cologne, is going underway, there'll be people who either follow the game but don't have that great a sense on who the stars are, or there might be newer players who are wondering who are the players I should be watching out for on these teams. And also, one of the difficult things about the game is that obviously players form rises and falls. The people who were stars before aren't stars now. People who weren't considered star level before might have risen to it recently. So in this video, I'm going to go through who I consider the stars of ESL One Cologne. I'm going to divide them into 3 categories. There's going to be superstars, and I'll define those. I consider the superstar someone who, even among star players, this guy stands out. In short, a superstar for me, it's usually going to be someone who's like top 5 or top 4 player in the entire world, and there has to be a degree in which they're kind of dominant in a sense. Like they're good against all sorts of opponents. They're very good, even compared to their team, even compared to their peer group, and you can almost bank on these guys to have some kind of big impact in every game, almost every map that they play for their team against all levels of opponent. That's a superstar. The second category I have is just stars. For me, stars are the other great players at the moment in the game. These are the players who have a big impact. They regularly have an impact, maybe not every time. They, in theory, are one of the better players in their team, but more importantly, they can't just be in their team, it has to be in the world. So as a result, you can be a star in my pool, even if you have a superstar on your team. Your team might just be so good you have multiple stars in the world. Meanwhile, I'm also making this point, just because you're the best player or one of the worst teams, I haven't included you in here. If you're legitimately not even like a top 20, not even a top 30 player in the world, you're not going to be on this list. You won't have made it. So, meanwhile, some of these teams, as you'll find out, because some of the top teams are pretty stacked, they might have 1 or 2 people. I think one team might even have 3, if I think correctly. There's the stars. The third group is former stars. And these are people who, at this tournament, just keep... they're on their lowest priority for you. They should be least important on the radar, but just keep a lookout for them in as much as they were at one time stars in some context. So maybe they can have a revival of form for a game, for a series, for maybe the tournament. And maybe if they start to heat up, that's why you should keep in mind, this guy was a superstar, so maybe he's on some sick form here. So the first group, I think actually overall, let me think. I had 15 names, I think, overall. Superstars, group 1. In this group, I only have 4 names. Only 4 players, by my estimation right now at this tournament, are superstars and really deserve your full attention when they're playing, when they're battling, when their team's even battling another elite team. Watch this guy. He can win the game. He can win the series for his team if he has the kind of amazing level performance they have. The other thing about the superstars is, in theory, if you're playing a full best of 3, if you're playing more than just one map, these guys should be the best player in the server. Whoever they go up against, unless it's another superstar, they shouldn't be outmatched by that guy. They should be able to match him on star power, firepower, kills, impact on the actual game itself, AWPing, clutching, rifling, whatever their strengths may be. Obviously different strengths, pistoling. These are the guys to watch. And my 4 players here, I'll start here, okay? Olofmeister from Fnatic. Now, it's worth pointing out, even among superstars, this guy at the moment has a bit more than everyone else in the world. He is the best player in the entire world in Counter-Strike Global Offensive. What's more, he's not just the best because he's a god at one area. He's the most complete player in the entire game, and he's extremely good at his strengths. So he's complete in as much as he's amazing with pistols, he's amazing on eco rounds where you have a pistol versus weapons, he's amazing with half buys, where he might only have a Galil sometimes, or he has to work with a scout or something. I think he doesn't really use scout that much, but you see what I mean. He's amazing on rifles. He's one of the best riflers in the world, top 3 at the very least. Unreal, all ranges, sprays, bursting, and he's one of the best, a top 5 AWP in the world. So he can literally do it all, and he's extremely good at certain aspects of this game. He's really good CT player. He can play by himself. He can play with Crims. Famously, he has an excellent synergy there. Great team player with that particular player. He can play as the rotator, which he's done for a lot of his career on Fnatic. Famously, on Inferno as CT, he would be the man who rotated from B over to the A site, and that was their dominant map that made them the great team. And also, he's a player where on CT side and on T side. On T side, you'll see him entry fragging despite the fact he's the star. Watch on Train, he walks outside into main and he gets work done there on a map that is considered one of the worst for Fnatic, and he gives them chances to win, and they have won that over some good teams. And on CT side, he doesn't sit back. If he's playing poorly, he still playmakes. I actually did a great my own phrase. Oh yeah, I did a great article about Olofmeister, in as much as it's a long article, it's lengthy. I go into a lot of these points in more depth. So you want to read that. It's called Olofmeister, the Measure of the Master. Now then, or Measure of a Master, I forget which. Now, the other thing about Olofmeister is he's a big-time clutch player as well. He's had super sick games on Cash, that's a specialty of his, but he's also the guy where when Fnatic really needs a kill around a game, he's often the guy that comes through, and as a result, he's the biggest impact player in the whole game right now. He's a big person to watch out for. Next on my list is going to be Guardian. Now, Guardian, over his career, has always been a star player. He's always been a top 10 player for pretty much his entire time in CSGO. But it wasn't until about 4 or so months ago that he really legit entered that top 5 status and became truly a superstar. Before, he was always on the brink of just a star and a superstar. And the reason why is because he'd have certain maps, we know Mirage, we know Dust 2, where he was superlative, he could be unreal. But it would always be for a half or for one map, and it wouldn't even be with consistency. Sometimes against better opponents, he'd just disappear. Sometimes against other AWPers, Kenny S. Sometimes he might not have such a great game anymore. He was always someone who never fully had the superstar aspect of he turns up every time, he's always being the best in the server, he always matches the other guy's star power. He was very erratic, extremely explosive, his game was incredible, but it was never quite the level it got to in the last 4 or so months. Now that's changed. On this spree that Na'Vi had, where they won a couple of events, ESWC, Star Series 13, making the finals of all these events, making top 4s like 5 or 6 in a row, as the team got consistency, one of the reasons for that was, yes, the introduction of Flamey as a secondary star, but it was also Guardian taking this leap up to being a superstar. And suddenly, his maps that he was really good on increased massively. His consistency as that lockdown CT sniper who can just take 3 or 4 people coming to his site routinely increased massively. And now he is the god AWPer. He is the best AWPer in the world. He is consistent. He can hit the hardest shots. He has the fastest firing speed, and his coordination in terms of how to play a sport and re-peak over and over is utterly insane. Very, very special player. Admittedly, not that great with rifles. Decent rifles for a guy who's an AWPer, but his AWP is absolutely superlative. He's one of the few players who wasn't affected by the AWP nerf whatsoever from a few months back that made the movement a bit slower when you scoped in. Next player, the third of my superstars, Device from TSM. Now, he's similar to all of them in as much as he's a complete player. He can AWP, he's amazing with pistols. He's actually, surprisingly, very, very good with the SMGs. He's really good with rifles. The thing with Device is that his style, okay, Olofmeister, one of his strengths is he is like a consistent like fragger 1 or 2 each round, etc. But Device, that's his whole game. Device usually, unless it's against lower teams, isn't the guy who's going to take over the game, as in get a 4 kill here, then a 3 kill there, then win a 1v3, then get another 4 kill. That's not the way he'll get his 20 or 30 kills. He'll get his 20 or 30 kills working within the framework of TSM and getting 1 or 2 kills this round, getting 1 kill next round, getting 1 kill the round after that, then getting 2 kills, then winning a 1v1, then getting 2 kills, getting a follow-up kill, and he just grinds away at you and constantly puts the rest of his team in favourable situations where the rest of them are so good that at that point they're playing 4v5s, they're playing 5v3s, whatever it is, and they're going to be winning a lot of these situations. So he's just a grinder. He's a very skilled all-rounder, maybe not as good in certain areas as Olofmeister. I think in most areas he's a little bit below Olofmeister. Debatable on pistols. He does have very excellent P250 in pistols, but just an all-round talent. Very talented. Now, he doesn't quite have the clutch gene Olofmeister has. That's another thing to differentiate the two. He has fallen apart at times. In the past, he was a big choker. Not as much now, but he still isn't the guy where if TSM's losing, he'll suddenly just like make plays like Olofmeister will, force the action, do the same thing repeatedly, have the confidence that he can win the same duel, put everyone on his back. That's not really Device's style. His style is more like when the rest of TSM's rolling, when TSM as a team's going, he will be the best player in TSM. He will consistently contribute, and TSM, as they get deep, will win in part because he's their best player and he can lead them and he can match up with the star power of the other players. The last of my superstars might surprise you. It is Skadoodle from Cloud9. Now, the debate as soon as I say there's only 4 superstars and I'm picking Skadoodle as my 4th one is going to be, how can you pick Skadoodle and not Shroud? Now, here's the interesting thing. When Cloud9 had their breakout, I initially thought of the 2 players, Shroud was the better player, because the first big breakout tournament, ESL, ESEA, he was a monster, but that was mainly in the final. What I've noticed about Skadoodle is Skadoodle, I'm now going to contrast against Guardian in the way I contrasted Device against Olofmeister. So, similar talents, both passive CT AWPers, both unreal at holding a spot and having people take them there. Try to take them there rather, en masse. 2 to 3 people, they'll hit 1, 2, 3, 4, just routine, like frag movie type shit, where once they hit the first 2, you just know the next 2 are coming, no matter who's coming around that corner. Unreal at that. Very, very good. And bit like Guardian, very fast firing speed. Not quite as fast as it's not quite as insane, the reflex shots, but his are more like his reflexes, you just know by the shot if it's going to hit or not. He's very consistent, like always hitting this flick shot, this shot, this shot, this shot. Once you've seen it work once or twice on the first couple, you know it's going on the next two. The consistency is great there. There's not a lot of variance in terms of which shots he hits and which shots he doesn't. You know the ones he's going to hit, and he will hit all the easy shots. That's a key thing. There's some snipers will have great Chris J style, hit crazy shots, this one over here, might miss the easy shot after that. Skadoodle's going to hit these ones 100%. He hits the 7 to 6 out of 10 shots all the time. And then his 8 or 9 ones are really high, and then sometimes he's hitting 10 out of 10 ones. So a very, very special sniper. The difference between him and Guardian, a little bit less explosive. Like in general, Skadoodle is about 90% of Guardian's game most of the time, which is extremely good still. His style, a bit like I put Device against all of them, less playmaking. He won't make plays. He'll just wait for you to come to his spot. And if you come to his spot, he can get the kills. If you don't, he'll allow you to go to the other side, possibly kill everyone there, and he might have to save or come into a 1v3. So he won't playmake in that respect. He won't put the team on his back and win the game single-handedly. He will just consistently give you 20 kills a map, and at least like 10 of those, 10 to 15 are going to be AWP kills. That is what he can do against every level of opponent, in every phase of a tournament, in theory, on practically every map. So the difference is, Skadoodle very rarely gets like a 30 kill map against top 10 level teams, but he seemingly always gets to his 20 kills. Off the top of my head, in this Cloud9 run since he joined and they started doing these finals and top 4s, they had 4 top 4s in a row, I think he might have had like 2 bad maps in that entire span of time. He had one against, I think one was against Mouse, where he just was like, he was kind of average, not good. He didn't have a star impact, and he got out fragged by Chris J. I think that was Cash. And then he had this game against, who else would it have been? I think there was a game possibly one against Na'Vi that he was quite bad in. Aside from that, like every other map, let's imagine on LAN he's played 30 maps. He might have had 26 or 27 that were all good, above average, and maybe 10 of those were like superlative maps. Very, very good player, but for me, the star of Cloud9. Even if, as a weird sense, he isn't like the star player in terms of making plays, but he's got everything as an AWPer. He's got everything you want, and as a star, who else in NA consistently puts it up like that? Now then, that's my 4 superstars. They're the players to watch who can potentially win their team the tournament. You'll notice all 4 of those players each are both the best player and play for a team that are in my top 4 in the world, and are all 4 considered teams with a chance to win this tournament. Fnatic, Na'Vi, TSM, Cloud9. That's actually 1 to 4 in order. I didn't actually pick it like that. I mean, obviously it plays into the fact that that's the way I think those teams, but that's the way it is. Star players. Stars, even in their team, even if they have a better player, these players are some of the best in the world and routinely will show us that. So we're going to go with, Fnatic has 2 that are going to fit in this category. We've got Crims and JW. Now, Crims is famous. His best strength, he is the most fundamentally sound player in the world. He is so good at doing all the basics that you should have as a good player, which, by the way, when you master those, make you a great player, because you'll have extreme consistency, amazing positioning, knows when to fall back, knows when to push up, knows how to use technique at different ranges against different types of situation. Are the 2 opponents coming? Is the 1 opponent coming quickly and I only have 10 bullets left instead of having the full 30? Would I spray? Would I burst? His timing and decision making in those senses is extremely good. So his technique is always on point. It's always very refined. His positioning is always very good, especially relative to his skill set. He's not as skilled as Olofmeister, but he can get as many kills as Olofmeister by putting himself in the best positions over and over and over again, and not taking as risky a peak as an Olofmeister could, but that Olofmeister could get away with, whereas Crims couldn't. Very, very sound player. This is the player you tell kids to watch if they want to learn how to be good at CSGO, because anyone who copies his style will get better at their rank, no matter whether the shittest rank or the best rank. And you can't say that for a lot of these superstars. You try and play AWP like Guardian, you're going to get bodied harder than you probably are right now with AWP, because you'll never be able to hit those shots. You'll be taking up terrible positions. It's not like that with Crims. Now, he hasn't been as good over the last few months as he was early on in the year and as he was at the end of 2014. At the end of 2014, he had a period where he was maybe even the best player in the world for 2 tournaments, for ESWC and Fragbite Masters. Let me think. And also, let's add a third one in there. I think Face It Season 2. 2014, he hasn't been as good. He still had tournaments where he's been pretty consistent. But overall, I still think of him as the second best player in this team. It's when him and Olofmeister, when they both are on form, that's when Fnatic's a pretty big favourite to win over most teams they play against. He's still extremely good in many areas. He's not a superstar. Maybe he was for a brief while at the end of the year. Now he's just a star, but he's definitely one of the best players in the world. Keep your eye out for this guy. Now, JW... he's the guy where, in contrast to Crims, is not fundamentally sound. He's the opposite of fundamentally sound. Takes terrible peaks, re-peaks enemies who know his spot and are holding for him, takes angles that you shouldn't do, buys glass cannon AWPs, and goes into spots where he's very likely to die, kills people, has low health, doesn't pull back, does everything fundamentally incorrect, but first of all, plays on a team with Crims and Olofmeister, which allows him the room to not have to get those kills all the time, to sometimes lose and put his team in a bad situation. They can still win those, they can get out of them, they can counter that, they can play on despite that, so it gives him the freedom to do that, there's no pressure, and he can play an extremely free role. The beauty of that is that he has an extremely high skill level and in certain games is fearless. And those two things combined with the wildcard aspect mean he will have games where he gets 20 to 30 kills, where he just wins the entire game for his team. The kills he gets are so crazy, are so disruptive to the opponent who can't predict they're going to be there. Sometimes is taking the right position to counter it, still gets killed when Fnatic's economically weak and he's using a glass cannon AWP, and they should have an advantage to now punish the poor economical decision of Fnatic to let him buy a glass cannon AWP, because he'll get away with all this. He's one of the biggest impact players in the world despite not being a superstar. Of these stars I list now, he's one of the ones who is very, very volatile and erratic. He'll have some games where he's bad or he just does nothing, has no impact, but when he has his games on, nowadays admittedly it's not as often. It was super often in late 2014. It looked impossible, the frag bite shit, the frag movie shit he was doing every big final. Now it's not as often. Let's say 1 in 4, 1 in 5 maps he does this, but when he does it, it is fucking unreal. He is, if you're talking about erratic players within the star category, he is the one where the cap, the ceiling is the highest of anyone. He's just not going to hit it anywhere nearly as often as some of the other players are in this category. Now then, Get Right, Ninjas in Pajamas player. Get Right used to be the greatest CSGO player ever. He might even still be. I'd have to really think about that topic and address everyone's career. He was the greatest for a long time. Even into 2014, no one was approaching him because he'd been an absolute god for about a year. And then after that, for about half a year, he'd still managed to maintain very high form and have returns to form. He was one of the main reasons NIP won ESL One Cologne last year and got their only ever major title. And even though at the end of the year, when they initially brought on Makaleli, he dipped and he had a very poor last major of the year, DreamHack Winter, he then really raised his form in sort of like March onwards. And he had a spur of March, April, maybe early May, where he was even seemingly back to being like a top 10 player, very good player. Even when Fnatic NIP got their heads completely smashed in by Envious in the final of Gfinity Summer Masters 1, he was a fucking beast who didn't go down while everyone else was getting wrecked on his team. He had balls, he was fighting back, he was really doing as much as he could, and he was still one of the best players in the server despite his team getting completely whitewashed. This guy is a fighter, he's so skilled in what he can do, he's really good spray, amazing mentality for the game, playing from behind, playing from clutch situations, 1v2s, 1v3s, routine that he can win them. Can play CT spots very well. He's not the great player he was. He's still a player that can have a lot of impact. He's still a player that because of his balls and his mental fortitude, he'll always find a way over a tournament to have an impact and give his team a chance. Now then, next player is Nex from Mouse Sports. This guy really has, in the last 3 months, come out of nowhere. No one had him on the radar as a great player, or even the potential to be. And this guy really is one of the 10 best players in the world. A very special player and has the potential to maybe go further because every tournament he's played now, 4 in a row, where his team's had top 4s, he's the best player on the team, best player for the tournament, he's for his team, and typically a top 5 player in the tournament, if not a top 3 player in all 4 of these tournaments. Really good player. Extremely explosive. Not as consistent as the superstars I've listed before, or a guy like Crims. Really explosive, but here's the thing. He's primarily a rifler, and It's his aim that's so crazy. His aim is consistently crazy. It's just whether he gets the impact in terms of kills, that's what's a bit erratic. But even so, he's consistently his team's best player. It's the consistency issue is, can he always go up against like a Guardian, Hall of Fame, etc.? No, not as often. That's where his issues are. He'll monster lesser teams. Against those top teams, he will have like a map, 2 out of 4 maps that he does really well. But at the moment, he hasn't quite taken the leap to superstar status. And also his team at the moment isn't really necessarily good enough to put him in position to have that maybe super impact where you really kick it in the gear, unless he goes Kenny S mode. At the moment, though, very good rifler. He's a player where his aim is going to astonish you. His reaction, his flick shots, really, really sick player. And it seems like his confidence is just building and building at the moment. He kind of is getting the sense that he's a star and he knows what he's doing. So very exciting player, especially right now to be watching in his 5th potential big time performance. And this is a major. So if he can do it now, this is big time shit. Now, he played at ESL One Katowice, the last major, and made it to round of 8 with Penta, and that's where we started to maybe notice him a little bit. But even so, that people thought back of Crystal, guys like that. Then this is a guy to watch for this tournament, because this could be a breakout where he shows us he's a superstar. Flamey, Natus Vincer, Na'Vi. Flamey joining Na'Vi is what turned Na'Vi from a team who would either place 5th to 8th or have a miracle run to a final and some super sick upset, or win one map off a top team. Flamey joining and him getting his game rolling is what made Na'Vi into a consistent top 4 team, a team that now I have 2nd ranked in the world, and which has won big events and won series over teams like Cloud9, Old Envious, a best of 5, now is a very dangerous team, and except for teams like TSM and Fnatic, is a favourite to beat anyone else in the world when they play them heads up. Now that it helps that they have tactics, helps that they have Guardian, who's a superstar, but Flamey really has established himself as a star player. Now the thing is, much like his name, he's extremely volatile. Like, he's not a consistent player, but when his game is on, and it reasonably often is on, it's on about half the time, he's going to be the 2nd best player in the server, sometimes the best player in the server. And his rifling, he doesn't have like super sick aim, it's more like he has super sick precision. As in, what will happen is when his game's on, then he'll just be getting those one-click headshots, those quick bursts that are kills, and it'll look like impossible. But if you actually watch his technique, that might have actually been the beginning of a spray, and he's just so good he'll kill him before he has to keep spraying, he can stop. It's not that his technique's brilliant, it's not that he always knows he's going to hit these shots. He very much is a player where it's hard to tell if he knows that he's on, if his team knows that he's on, but his impact, that's the thing, his kills are impact frags, that's where he's dangerous. And beyond his rifling, his deagle is fucking crazy. He's one of those players who can use a deagle. I think it's an economically inefficient weapon, but he can make it work to astonishing degrees. Happy, Envious. Now, he's the in-game leader of Envious, but he's also the best player in Envious. At the end of 2014, early 2015, he was the best player in his team. He was one of the best players in the whole world. He maybe was approaching that superstar status where he was in-game leading, very loosely. He has quite a loose style, but he was fragging everyone. He's a lurker. He was getting these kills, consistently good with rifles, good with pistols. Now, he's recently been adding in some AWPing, which I don't particularly like, so that's a qualm. Like, if he doesn't do that very well at this tournament, I think he's maybe going to drop out of being a star when you consider who else is good in his team. But in theory, he's not the primary AWPer because they've got Kenny S now. If he goes back to his lurking style, his rifling style, playing certain sites, be on Inferno as CT, he can definitely be a star player, and his skills are really good. Another thing that's good about him is some of the players in his past teams lacked mental fortitude. They would fall about when it was a bad game. They'd look for others to pick them up. He hasn't had that problem to the same degree. He has actually, like, sort of, I won't say he's get right, because get right is a very unique player in that sense, but he's approaching a get right sort of mental fortitude where he still finds a way to fight back. He gets mad in a way that other players sometimes lay down and just take the beating. I like that about him. I think he's a very good player. He hasn't quite always been star player recently, but I still think he should be and he can be, and he's in this category still. Another player from his team, Kiyashima. Kiyashima was the guy where him getting his shit together and becoming an impact player is what allowed his team to win the major DreamHack 2014, 2 majors ago. That's what took them there, that's what won them it. When he's had games off, his teams lacked for a consistent start. All they had before was Happy, and they needed someone else at that level. Shox wasn't quite there. Smiths and MBK were on and off, and they were more supportive players anyway. When his team struggled a bit, and they were still placing top 4, but they weren't winning events anymore, that's when Kiyashima was carrying them to keep them in those top 4s. He was dropping 30 kills all the time. He was still doing work. He became more of a dominant player rather than just a straight-up entry fragger. Became more of a mid-round lurker and more of a dominant player where it felt like they shifted the game around him because they knew he was the guy carrying them. At least for like 3 or 4 months in the middle part of this year, from like March onwards or so, he has kind of been the carry player of this team. Maybe not so much towards the end when they had their difficulties, but I think he still deserves to be in this category. And I think if this team's going to be good now, he should be one of the better players in the team. Cajun B, TSM. Now, what's funny is, if I actually had to rank who I think the best players are in TSM, I would probably still rank Device number 1, he's the superstar. Dupree, in terms of overall game, overall consistency, I'd probably still have him as second best player. So this will sound weird that I've got Cajun as the star and not Dupree. Now, the reason I have Cajun as my star player after Device is because Cajun B is an extremely volatile player. This is a guy where he either has an okay impact or he monsters the whole game and can be the best player in the server. Even against Fnatic, even against Na'Vi. He has certain maps. I mean, DOS 2 is a great example. He's done it on Overpass, where he will just go 30 plus kills, killing people every round. He's almost a player where he's known as a rager from his past. It feels like he's the guy where when he rages, it's good. That makes him just turn it on the fucking opponent and just go to work on them, making them suffer for the fact that he's pissed off and that things aren't going the well and that his team's not supporting him, and he just takes out his frustration on the opponent, and that's fucking awesome to watch. He only tends to do it like 1 out of 3, 1 out of 4 games. When he does it, what a fucking unreal rifler this guy is. He can also AWP if he wants. After you talk about names like All of Them, Device, God tier riflers who can also AWP very well, this guy's right there in the mix there. He's another guy where if he wants to pick up the AWP, he can be the primary AWP for his team. In general, it should be Device, but he can take over primary AWPing and he can have a big impact. Very special player. Shroud from Cloud9. As I mentioned already, when I actually have looked at the totality of Cloud9's good run, Skadoodle is easily the star player for me. Now, Shroud, what's deceptive about Shroud is where Skadoodle's more like the 20 kills a game, I get 20 kills, 20 kills, 21 kills, 22 kills, 20 kills, 19 kills, 23 kills, whereas that's like the run of games that Skadoodle will have. Shroud is more like this. For a tournament, he won't consistently be the best on his team, but he will have maps where he is the best on his team. He'll have a map where rather than 20 kills, he'll drop 30 kills, 33 kills. Then though, he'll have a bad map where he'll just got 15 kills, 14 kills. Those will happen too. His consistency isn't there as much. Very passive player, makes people come to him, uses his excellent aim to use crosshair placement, is very on point, very well done technique-wise. So combined with really good aim and this passive playstyle, when people come to his spots, when he's set up for kills, when he can get trade kills on the way, he knows an enemy is, he's going to get a lot. He's going to get all the easy kills. He's going to mop up completely. He's going to get a lot of kills. And sometimes he has explosive games. Now, one of the interesting things I did notice is he's the Fnatic killer. The majority of his monster games in this run of Cloud9 have come against Fnatic. They played them in the 4-map final of ESL ESEA Pro League, and he was amazing in this tournament, even in games, in that series rather, even in games they were losing, and they did lose. He was unreal in the semi-final that they beat Fnatic in at Face It Stage 2, in the semi-finals there, that allowed them to go to the final. But against some other teams, he's had his problems. He had his issues against TSM in the final. He had his issues against Na'Vi in the final. He had some big issues against Virtus Pro at times in that semi-final. So against the elite level teams, unless it's Fnatic, he goes missing on most maps quite often. At least that's been the trend so far in the 4 big tournaments we've seen him play so far. With that said, he will still give you a map every now and then. He has top teams that's going to be good or above average. And against lesser teams, he monsters. He cleans up. He shits on people who are worse than him. Very good. Like I say, he gets the easy kills. That's what he will always do. He's very good at that. So he's got his own unique quality in which he's very good. The problem Shroud has as well is he's not a playmaker. He's not someone where if his team's losing, this is an issue Cloud9 has actually, in as much as Skadoodle and Shroud, both are the stars, but they're not the playmakers. He's not going to do some crazy thing, go out of his way, make this extra push here where he couldn't take a risk here. He's a risk-averse player. He needs his team to set him up, and then he can carry the ball home, as it were. Last star player is going to be another TSM player, Dupree. Now, the thing about Dupree, and why I've listed him at the end here, is he's purely just a consistency player. He's got good aim, but doesn't have the best technique, just forces his technique a little bit, sprays a lot. He tends to play pretty aggressive, doesn't hold back much. His issue is he's quite good in all areas. He doesn't AWP, but in all other areas, pistols, rifles, clutches sometimes, early round kills. He's quite good in all areas. He's an entry fragger. It's rare that you get entry fraggers who are at the star level. And he's just consistently good. His thing is he just plugs away. And when he plugs away, his team's going to do well. He's going to match up well. If you consider him the third best player, I consider him the second best. Second or third, he's going to match up very well against second or third best players from other teams, especially because he's consistently giving you an output. He's not just having an erratic game here, and this map he's not so good on, he drops off. As a result, he puts TSM in good positions to win over and over, and his skill level's always been good. He's always been up there as one of the better players, and I think he still overall still deserves that spot, especially because TSM has won 4 out of whatever it is, the last 6 tournaments they've played. Now then, the last category is former stars. Now I've got 8 names in this list. First name, Snacks. In early 2014, when Virtus.pro won the second major, ESL One Cologne, their form was unreal. One of the highest levels of Counter-Strike we've ever seen for a single tournament from beginning to end. And his play, he was probably the best player in the tournament. He was the MVP, and his level at the time was fucking unbelievable. His rifles are really good. His pistols were sick at the time. He could even AWP if he wanted to sometimes. And he's famous for this intuitive ability in 1v3s and in smoke situations. Situations where you're lacking information, but you're having to visualize, make quick decisions, come up with a plan instantly and execute it without hesitation, and to have the balls to do these things is really good. Now, he retains some of that. The problem is he really has dropped off star level. It's been really erratic for his teams. Sometimes he doesn't show up. Sometimes he's the reason they lose, and he did quite badly for a couple of months. I think Gfinity was one where when they finished in like second to last place. No, they finished last place, actually. He was pretty terrible, actually. Actually, let me think. No, they were second to last, I think. Fuck it, who cares? He really suffered in that scenario. But he was once a great player, so you always have the hope that maybe he can do it for a map or a series or a game, or a tournament rather. Another Virtus.pro player, Pasha. Now Pasha, in early 2014, when they had their rise to being a top 3 or 4 team in the world Virtus.pro, he was the most consistent player. He was always the second on the scoreboard. His AWP was really good, his rifles were solid, his pistols were there. He's such an aggressive player, and his positioning sometimes is so risky that now that his skill's fallen off a bit and he's not as much good an AWPer, he doesn't even use the AWP as the main weapon now. They've made Neo the main AWPer. He actually doesn't deserve star status anymore. Still very famous player, still has the odd map that's impressive. He's not really at that level anymore. Now I'm going to put another Virtus.pro player in here just for the sake of doing a unique aspect to this, which is Neo. Now, what's weird is Neo's never been a star player in CSGO. In fact, he's been one of the worst players on Virtus.pro for most of their time in CSGO. But, first of all, he was the best player ever in 1.6. He was an absolute god. Everything I described about Olofmeister before, he was like that in 1.6, but better, and for like 7 years or something ludicrous like that. Year in, year out, year in, year out, constantly. Now then, in CSGO, he's never been that, but here's what's interesting. Last tournament, CVOP Season 7 finals, VP won the tournament and he was the MVP of the tournament. Every big series, he was the best player, and he switched to being the primary AWP, which was never his role in 1.6, never his role in this team particularly. In fact, it was Pasha and the Snacks who AWPed instead. But he was the primary AWPer, and he out-AWPed people like Skadoodle. He out-AWPed Guardian to a degree. He had maps where he was getting 30 kills. He was really dominant. I don't think he'll have that level of form, but the fact he used to be a god in 1.6 and has had this one-off amazing MVP tournament, think means I have to put him in this category because he's still someone to a degree to watch out for. He could still do something pretty cool at this tournament and have a big impact on a series. Now then, Kenny S, Envious. In late 2014, and for the first 3 months, 2.5 months, of 2015, this guy played the highest level Counter-Strike in the history of the game. I think even better than Get Right. Because he was a primary AWPer, he had to have the AWP, and yet when he did, he was superlative both sides of the game, entering with the AWP, lockdown CT player, could hit the craziest shots, one of the fastest firing speeds, yet one of the most accurate, amazing even at clutch rounds. This guy was the god AWPer. He was the best AWPer we've ever seen. Guardian, even now at his level, isn't as high as Kenny S was previously before. Now then, after the AWP nerf, he dropped off a bit. The thing is, he still gets numbers. He still gets the 20 kills, the 18 kills. He just doesn't have so many crazy... He doesn't have the half and the game that you always knew he was going to, where he just carried that old Titan team. Really did carry him on his back, dropping 50 kills, 30 kills, 40 kills in games, sometimes that they'd lose. You could bet your house that he was going to get these kills and he was going to dominate, and he was carry S, even if Titan was shit. He hasn't been that player. He gets kills, but his impact isn't as great, and he hasn't been able with the AWP to be as consistently great, and he's really lost his title to Guardian Skadoodle now. Scream, Kingwin's best player. Now, first of all, it's debatable he's Kingwin's best player. Maybe Rain is, because Rain's a bit more of a consistent player. Scream has never really gotten back to that level he was at in sort of the middle of 2013 when he was the headshot machine. He had crazy aim. He was very erratic, very volatile. He reminds me in that era of what Flamey is now. He was the second best player on his team, more like around the third. It was between him and MBK at times, because MBK was quite a consistent player, good clutch player. But as the second star to Shox, he was the guy where he'd have the big games, some of them famously against Nip, when Vegas managed to finally topple Nip, and his aim was fucking crazy. And he's known for this style where he went for the head every time, he tried to tap it off every single time, which is a crazy technique to use in CSGO, where people tend to spray and burst at mid-range, but he made it work, and he was fucking crazy. Now, he's never been very good in terms of clutch play, he's never been very reliable, and he's not in the star category at the moment, and his team's not at that level, but I do still think the skills are there, and you see flashes of it from time to time. So he's still a player where I don't hold out hope, but I keep my eye out on him. I can keep him on my radar, what's going on with Scream, because he still does have sick aim. Watch his stream, watch the highlights, he still has monster aim. It's whether he can apply it, and whether he can not just get kills, but make them impact kills that win rounds and win games. That's our question for Scream, and at the moment, he hasn't fully answered it. Shox, Titan. Now, Shox was, after Get Right, considered the best player of all time in CSGO. Late 2013, when Very Games took over as number one team. Early 2014, even when they started to go to shit and they went out in the majors. Online especially, in some of the land play, he was a god. He was absolutely amazing. This monster of the mid-round. Whereas Get Right was the late game player coming from behind, he was the mid-round player. You open up a site with a couple of kills, do some damage to someone, or leave him in a 2v3 or a 1v2, he was money. He's gonna get that first kill no matter what. Then maybe he gets the next, maybe he kills it out, maybe he closes it out. If he takes them as 1v1s, he's gonna monster people. His aim was fucking nuts. His rifle aim was absolutely insane at the mid-range. Really special player, and one of the best pistol round players in terms of raw impact and headshot ability you will ever see. This guy, you could make like an hour-long movie of clips where he kills 3 people with a P250 or another pistol, and they're all headshots, and they're all first bullet fired right into the dome, one after the other. Absolutely amazing player at his peak, and a special peak level player. Problem is, when he joined Envious, he was never used that way. He was used as an entry fragger. Eventually, he became pretty good at that earlier in the year, but he was never the star, except briefly for like a couple of tournaments around the Star Series 13 level. That couple of tournaments, when Titan Envious was actually falling off, then he carried for a couple of tournaments, and he was pretty good. Gfinity Summer Masters 1 that they won. But after that, he fell off a bit at the end of Envious, and he hasn't really so far in Titan showed us the monster form. So we don't know that he'll get back there again. Luckily, he's been there reasonably recently out of these teams and the players in this list, but he's not there at the moment, and he'll have to probably get there if Titan's going to have any chance of cracking top 8, definitely if they're going to make top 4. Flusher, Fnatic. Now, it sounds unfair, right? How can Fnatic have 4 players on this list? Because here's the thing. First of all, Flusher was legitimately one of the best players in the world in early 2014. When they won DreamHack Winter, none of their players were world-class players. JW has his issues. Schneider was very erratic but had good aim. Flusher had some rounds he would win, but he was played such a fucking weird style. His movements were weird. He didn't seem like he even moved that efficiently. He'd very sporadic with where he'd get kills. He'd win some clutches, but he wasn't on the level of Get Right as a late game lurker type player. Then in early 2014, he really became the star of the team. He was very consistent. He was playing the lurking role. He was at the level of Get Right. He was really around that level as a lurker. He was very, very good. He was consistent in the kills he was getting. Some people think he cheated, but whatever. We'll ignore that for now. I can't fucking go into that in this video, can I? So he was a really good player. And before the Olaf M and Crims era, he was actually the best player for Fnatic. And probably for 3 or 4 months, he was pretty solid up there, even though Fnatic was dropping off as a team. Now, he's not going to be the star. There's so many other good players in his team. It's not required for him to be the star. And as a result, he's dangerous in this sense. He'll occasionally have that 1 out of, let's say, 6 or 7 maps where he can be the best player or a top 2 player in Fnatic. But it's the fact that, first of all, he can even add that in that makes him dangerous. And secondly, of all the 4th best players on a team, he's by far the best on any of these teams you're looking at. You're just not going to find a 4th best player who has the history of him and has the caliber of him. He's just a very special player in that sense. Even though at the moment he doesn't play as special, just the role he can play and what he can do from that role. Last player, Forest for NIP, Ninjas in Pyjamas. Now, Forest was, at one point in time, the 2nd best player in the world in early CSGO. The first sort of 4 to 5 months of CSGO. Then people like Dosia, Guardian, these guys, let me think, Scream, Kenny S, these sorts of players started to emerge more and started to establish themselves more. Then he was still a top 10 player. He was always much more erratic than Get Right. He didn't have the clutch factor Get Right did. He didn't have the mental fortitude Get Right did. His aim, though, was always sick for the first year and a half. He was one of the best aimers, if not the best aimer. The best raw rifle aim, where super long range, headshot, first bullet, pistols, one of the best pistol players ever. Crazy, crazy aim. Really sick with the USPS. He still has flashbacks of it. He'll have a couple of rounds where he does it. He'll have a half where he does it. But he's not reliable to do it anymore. And actually now, of all these star names on this list, he's one of the ones who has bad games. So that's disappointing in that sense. It's unlikely he'll ever be a superstar or ever be a star again. But still keep your eye out there. He is one of the greatest players ever in 1.6. Top 2 or top 3 all time for sure. He was a very amazing player in that game. He was really good early in CSGO. He was good about a year after that. And he has dropped off, but he's still worth pointing out. So those are the stars. Those are the guys to watch at ESL One Cologne. And as they go, to some degree, so their teams will go. So I think at the end of the tournament, when you look at the stars that didn't perform, didn't go so well, because CS is a star game, yes, team play is very important. They facilitate the stars, what they can do. I think you'll see some of the stars who underperformed, their teams will be the one that won't go deep in the tournament. They won't have had a big success. I think it's almost certain, no chance that my superstars have a bad tournament and yet their teams win or make the top 4. Thanks to Overdraft for the money.